Let's talk about one of the most powerful economic forces on the planet, one that pretty much operates in the shadows of global conflict.
I mean, we all get this, right? Wars destroy nations. They bring devastation, loss, chaos. They just tear societies apart at the seams. But here's the crazy part. While all that destruction is happening, for some businesses, things are actually looking up. They get richer. You see, every time a conflict starts, this huge economic machine just roars to life. For them, war isn't just a political event. It's a massive business opportunity.
And that, right there, is the secret business of war. It's a system where, believe it or not, the money starts moving long before the first shot is ever fired. In a way, the war begins on paper, way before it ever hits the battlefield.
Okay, so how does a system like that even function? Well, it's often called an iron triangle. Think of it as a self-reinforcing loop of money, influence, and power. Let's break down exactly how the pieces fit together.
The core idea has a name, the military-industrial complex. And look, this isn't some fringe theory from the internet. The term was actually made famous by a U.S. president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a former five-star general, no less. In his farewell address way back in 1961, he warned everybody about the immense power of this permanent alliance between a nation's military and the massive arms industry that supplies.
So here are the three corners of that triangle. First, you've got the government. They provide the funding and set the policy. Then you have the defense industry. They're the ones supplying the weapons and services. And of course, they're doing it for a profit. And finally, the third corner is the military itself. They execute the policy, and by doing that, they create a constant demand for everything the industry produces. See? Each corner needs the other two to thrive.
All right, so that's the theory. It sounds logical, but where's the hard evidence? How can we actually trace these connections out in the real world? Well, like they always say, let's follow the money.
And for this, we're going to turn to a really key source, a 2022 paper from the Bank for International Settlements. What these researchers did was pretty clever. They looked at what happened to federal defense contracts after the huge, unexpected shock of September 11th, which, as you know, led to this massive and sudden surge in defense spending.
And they asked a very direct question. When there's a sudden flood of cash on the table, how much are political connections actually worth? You know, in dollars and cents.
Well, the BIS paper points out that lobbying by defense contractors, that's them trying to influence government officials, more than doubled after 2001. It jumped from around $60 million a year to over $120 million. Now, that wasn't just some minor budget change, it was a major strategic shift.
And here's the payoff. The study found that firms with those established political connections, the ones doing the lobbying and making donations, got significantly larger contracts. On average, we're talking about a third more in contract value compared to the firms that weren't connected.
Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe those connected firms were just the best at what they do. But the research actually challenges that idea. The paper found that the biggest jump in contracts often went to firms that were smaller, had been underperforming, and were under less scrutiny. The evidence points more toward connections than pure merit playing a key role in who got the money.
And this all leads to a really powerful thought. When contracts are basically guaranteed through connections and a long war means steady spending, the financial outcome for these companies is pretty much secured, regardless of what happens on the battlefield. In this system, defeat can still be very, very profitable.
And this is where the incentives start to get truly unsettling. Because if profit is one of the main drivers, what does that mean for how long these conflicts go on?
The logic is brutally simple. A short, decisive war, that's a limited one-time profit opportunity. But a long, drawn-out conflict? That means years of repeated government spending, long-term maintenance contracts, and a continuous demand for weapons, ammo, and services. From a purely business perspective, stability can be bad for the war economy.
And this isn't a phenomenon that's unique to any one country. As one source notes when looking at the war in Ukraine, Russia has effectively created a new military-industrial class, whose welfare depends on the continuation of the war. It's a systemic pattern that just emerges whenever these powerful incentives are in place.
So this forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. If a long conflict is good for business, who in this system actually benefits when peace finally breaks out? Whose revenue stream suddenly dries up?
So let's bring it all together and answer that question directly. Who are the real winners in the business of war?
Now, it's really crucial to understand this. We often look for villains, for these evil actors deliberately causing harm. But the system doesn't necessarily need them. It just needs incentives. When the financial incentives line up with conflict, the system will naturally just keep itself going.
The beneficiaries are the structures and the people who ride these financial waves. Investors in defense industries, corporations with those long-term government contracts, political systems that are tied to all that defense spending, and yeah, even the financial institutions that lend governments the money to pay for it all.
You know, wars are often explained as politically unavoidable, a tragic necessity. But the profits are almost always predictable. And that leaves us with one final, lingering question. If war is a business, who would ever want it to end?